Hello and welcome to Tank and AFV News. My name's Tom. We're doing another book review. About a week ago, we got another group of books in the mail from the fine folks at Casemate Publishing. So again, we want to thank them for these review copies. The first book we're going to be looking at is from the Pen and Swords Images of War series. This one's called Tank Wrecks of the Eastern Front, 1941 to 1945. Rare photographs from wartime archives. This one is by Anthony Tucker Jones. I have to say I don't actually know much about Mr. Tucker Jones. I do know that he's done quite a few of books of this series. So, I mean, if we look in the back of the book here, the further reading section is all other books of the series that he's done. So I assume he has a pretty prolific photo collection of his own, or spends a lot of time digging through old photographs and doing books of this nature. Start off with a physical description of the book. Size-wise, it is pretty comparable. So, like, here's I assume probably a lot of you are familiar with the new Vanguard series from Osprey. It's about the same size, dimensions. Or if you want to compare it out, if you've been around a while, you remember these old Tank Illustrated series. It's about the same size as that too. But it is a little heavier, paper, heavier binding, and it's quite a bit thicker. So if we look at the bindings here, you can compare. See, it's definitely a little thicker book. This one comes in at about 140 pages. Now, as far as the actual content here, looking into it, this is essentially a photo book, but it does have some text, and it covers a pretty broad topic. I mean, it's Eastern Front, 41 through 45, so all 4 years. And it is, as you can see from the list of chapters here, really skewed a little heavily toward the first year of the war, Operation Barbarossa, or I should say first year in the East, certainly. And it's divided up by vehicle types per chapter. So you can see the T-26, BT-7, T-28, and T-35, KV-1, KV-2, T-34. So you can see that those are all vehicles that are around in the first year of the war. And, some of these, especially these right here, are really only around in large numbers that first year. So the book is heavily skewed toward the earlier, that 1941, 1942 range. And the author explains that partly just because there's a lot more photos available, because the Germans were taking a lot of photos. In that part of the war, when you're advancing, when you're taking ground, it's easier to get photos. Like he says, later in the war, they're not taking as many photos of destroyed enemy tanks because they're in retreat. It's a lot harder to go photograph a destroyed tank when you don't control the battlefield. And so the same with the Russians. He says, I mean, aside from they just didn't take, there's just not as many pictures, but also later in the war, they're mostly interested in just sort of some of the more exotic heavy stuff, like the Tigers, Panthers to a certain extent. But you'll see that there's far fewer pages devoted to the German tanks than to the Russian tanks. And that's just, it has to do with who was taking pictures at what point and what's available. So as we go through, so he has a little description at the beginning, photograph sources, just were all sourced by the author. And then he gets right into it. So T-26, there's a few pages of description, and then the photos. And so you can see there's, general pattern is 2 photos per page. So sort of when you're looking at the book open, you get 4 photos with each, with pretty well written captions describing it. And most of these photos, a lot of them I didn't recognize. And I like to think I've looked through a fair number of these types of photo books. So, none of them, not too many jumped out at me as something I had seen before. One other thing I'd note is that this is really not for the squeamish. A lot of these pictures have dead crewmen in them. So, something I'm sure most adults wouldn't be bothered by, but, if you're buying a book for a kid who might be getting into the subject, it's a little gruesome. But, that's the reality of war and of armored warfare. So, we'll go ahead here, skip ahead, so T-26, then you get into the BT-7 here. So like I said, a lot more emphasis on Operation Barbarossa stuff. T-28, T-35. I don't want to just show the whole book, so we'll just sort of flip through here. But I think this gives you a pretty good idea. I mean, the photo quality, it's sort of like a semi-gloss paper. The photo quality reproduction is decent. Yeah, obviously these photos were it's not like the cameras back then were spectacular. It's black and white, and the photos are only so big. So, but still, you can catch quite a bit of detail. KV, KV2. You know, here we're into the T34. Like I said, it's a 140-page book, and you know it's not until page 97, a good 2/3 through it, that we get to the German stuff. So Panzer III, Panzer IV, Tiger, and then Panther. And that's pretty much it. So there's really not much else to say. It is $14.99 in the UK, so in pounds, and US dollars $22.95. Odds are you could probably find it cheaper online through some of the online booksellers. You know, it's a nice little volume if you are looking for photo resource for these vehicles, particularly, like I said, early war Russian stuff. You'll probably find some photos in here you might not have seen before. It's interesting, a lot of these also, you know, each of these wrecks kind of tells a story. You can, you know, it's always interesting to look at them and try to figure out exactly what happened, how this vehicle got in that situation. So if you're looking for a photo reference on the Eastern Front, it's certainly not a bad little volume. So I'm going to give this one a thumbs up. And once again, thank you to the fine folks at Casemate for the review copy. And thank you for watching. I hope this was helpful. All right, we'll see you on the next one.